session this morning, you saw each of the networks giving their presentations and talking really around things that were specifically related to a particular thematic area. And this side of our work is trying to broach the interconnections between those. And I guess synthesis research is really about pulling information together about a specific subject. And what we look as integrative research is starting to pull that synthesized research together to get additional learnings out, so to contribute new insights from work that's been done already. So that's where the novel bit of research comes into our synthesis and integrative research program. And really a real strong focus of ours from this particular program is to deliver something to end users that is useful to them, and not just doing research because it seems like a really good thing to do and may be useful in the future, but really trying to get something tangible within a realistic time frame. So we have our research, thematic research programs going on, and you heard all about that this morning in most of the areas, various calls that have gone on, and a lot of work being done. And really what this process is about is trying to get that into the connections between those thematic areas and other work that's done. And I guess, talking a bit around here, talking last in the afternoon, there's a lot of the concepts that have been drawn out through the various presentations, which is terrific because it starts to show that the researchers certainly in this area and in this room today are starting to do that themselves without sort of us pushing them along. What we really, as I said, trying to do is deliver a coherent body of synthesis and integrative research. We don't have massive budgets at this stage, and this is our third phase in this program. But we're trying to help decision makers with information and tools to help Australia be well adapting to climate change. And it says well adapted there, I meant to say well adapting. And really what we're using as the umbrella for this is what will a well adapting Australia look like in 20 years' time, and how will we get there? And I say adapting, and it's come out clearly through some of the presentations as well, is that we can't aim to be well adapted because climate change is not going to stop. It's fairly insidious, it's going to continue on, and we need to continually adapt to it and change our practices over time and get tools and processes in place to do that. So to develop this strategy, we did a fair bit of end-user consultation, and we've talked to Commonwealth Government, states and territories. Unfortunately, we didn't have the capacity and the time frame we've got to go and talk to local governments as much as we would have liked. Talked to a wide range of people, and also pulled together information about from various other processes to try and contribute to what might be required or could be done in a fairly small program. We used a science review panel and also talked to our end user colleagues in our forum for states and territories to try and bring a massive amount of research needs down into something tangible where we might be able to contribute something to the process, and in the spirit of hoping we get another phase of NCCARF later on to continue this on into the future. So we've got a bit of a synthesis and integrative strategy that's developed out of it, and through talking to people and through our lessons that we've learned from previous work, we've really tried to say, okay, what is the process for doing good quality synthesis and integrated work that is useful to people and actually provides them with something they need and something that they're readily able to take up and use. And that is a real challenge when it comes to this sort of work, because often the researchers will get the money and they go off and they do work, and they come back in 3 years' time and say, look, here's the work that we did for you, and the end users go, oh, sorry, we don't really need it anymore, the question's changed, or we made that policy decision already and we're not going to have we're not going to be changing our policy for a few years. And so there's often a disconnect between the actual work that's done and the utility of it by end users. And so what we're looking at is trying to build up a process by which we can challenge that and get better usage. And again, some of the projects that I've talked about this afternoon have shown us the way forward, and some of the lessons from those sort of projects we've actually tried to take up into the strategy. And essentially, as I said, we need a living document, so we've got a strategy, we've got a number of projects that are outlined, and those projects will change as they're delivered or as needs change. But the basic tenets of the strategy, the structure of it, should stay quite stable over time. I guess the thing that I've found in my career is that a lot of the sort of various funding bodies that are done always want steering, particularly from federal government, want steering committees set up, and they want end users involved, and it's always been fairly linear. And we get sort of, project comes up, they set up a steering committee, researchers meet with the steering committee turn up on the day, they all talk about it, they disappear off, the steering committee forget about it till the next meeting 7 months later, the researchers forget about what they've just heard, and they go off and do what they had said they'd do in the first place. And so it's really a non-adaptive scientific process, and I've been on the receiving end of funds doing that, and I've done it myself, so I'm as guilty as potentially many others. What we're trying to do with this is say, okay, let's involve end users in the study teams. So rather than just talk to them, let's get them actively involved so that they actually own it right from the beginning, participate in the process, and adjust it as they go. And that sort of means perhaps in certain teams funding the participation of end users. So I mean, a lot of what I've said almost seems like I'm blaming the researchers, but the blame lies with both sides really. The end users have to commit to projects that they say are useful. They have to be prepared to be involved in them. And I think there's really good examples that we've heard this afternoon where it's worked. And I think that's the sort of thing we have to achieve through this program if we want to have products that are useful. And from an NCCARF perspective, if we don't have products that are useful, we don't succeed, we won't get more funding. So for us to drive something on that actually gets used is really important to us. So one of the challenges is always how do people communicate together? I call it finding the keys to Babel, because it really is. Scientists speak different languages to end users speak different languages to scientists. Different disciplines in science speak differently. I've recently started being involved in more social science, and I'm an ecologist by trade, and when I first went to my meetings with my colleagues, I couldn't understand what they were talking about. I still don't in some instances, but we're getting there, and we do need, the challenge is how do we communicate together. We heard that talk about communication. Virtually everyone talked about communication being a challenge for us this morning, both in terms of just how we talk to each other, in terms of understanding, timing, all that sort of stuff, as well as a transformational change, which Tim Lineman threw up in his question to John later on in the morning. The other thing, and associated with communication, is how do we actually present the products to end users that are useful? So, providing them with a paper that's going to be published in Nature isn't necessarily the best way of getting information used by the policy makers. We often say, we want to go out and do your research, come back with 5 papers and a 2-pager about what they really mean to policy makers at the end. And that might not be useful in its own right anyway. We really have to challenge this and say, how do we get the best communication products to the people that they want? It may be a picture. It may be a model. It could be a big tome. Maybe some people find that useful. Some organizations hire knowledge brokers whose role it is to sift through detailed literature and pull it together into something that they need. And it may be a 2-page document. But again, by working with end users throughout the process, we're more likely to have something that's useful to them in the end. So having talked about the actual strategy itself, how do we get somewhere and develop a list of projects that we should work in? And again, looking at that well-adapting Australia thing. So I guess we wanted to do a range of projects. We started to characterise what a well-adapted Australia might look like at that time, or well-adapting Australia might look like at that time. We also need to do work around identifying and overcoming barriers to achieving that. And